My son's wife told me the dog needed the bed. If any part of this feels familiar to you, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. It was Tuesday, already dark outside the window over the sink. They lived in a tract house in Northwood, a suburb of Irvine, California. It was all stucco and tile roofs, everything the same pale beige or washed out terracotta. I had driven down from Oregon after they said they needed help. After my son Kevin's call about my daughter in law, Sarah, being overwhelmed with the baby, with work, my own house, the one my husband and I had built, sat empty back in Ashland. I'd closed up the rooms, packed a small suitcase, and locked the door, promising I'd only be gone a few weeks. That was 3 months ago. My back ached. It had been aching for weeks, a dull, constant throb from sleeping on the narrow sofa in the living room. It folded out, supposedly, but the mechanism was broken, stuck in a perpetually uneven state. The cushions were thin, the springs pressed into my hips. It was better than the air mattress they offered initially, the one that deflated by morning, leaving me effectively on the floor anyway. They had a guest room, of course, upstairs, down the hall from their bedroom, and the nursery. It had a proper bed, a queen, made up with nice sheets I'd once bought for them as a housewarming gift. That room was occupied by their golden retriever, Buster. He was an old dog, 12 years old, with a sweet face and arthritis in his hind legs. They said he needed his space, his routine. He slept in the guest room, alone. The bed was unmade most of the time. The door left open, a dog bed in the corner he rarely used. The queen bed remained empty, a monument to an unseen occupant, more valued than I was. Sarah said it casually, while wiping down the kitchen counter after dinner. Kevin was wrestling with the baby, Noah trying to get him into his pajamas. Oh, Mom, just so you know, we can't really move Buster out of the guest room. He's old, you know, needs his routine. He's just used to sleeping in there. You understand, right? The couch is probably more comfortable anyway. She didn't look at me when she said it. Her eyes were fixed on the streaks on the granite. Kevin didn't say anything. He just grunted from the living room, wrestling the baby. It was a small thing. The dog, the bed, the couch, small in the grand scheme of things. But the words settled in my chest, heavy and cold. The dog needed the bed. I didn't. I was 81 years old. I had raised this man in the next room. I had sacrificed, saved, worried, loved. And the dog needed the bed more than I did. That night, on the lumpy sofa, the springs digging in, I listened to the house settle. I heard Buster's occasional sigh from the guest room upstairs. It wasn't just about the bed. It was about visibility, about worth. I was here to help, to be useful, to be a grandmother, but I was also invisible. A utility, not a person with needs, with a history. Just a body occupying space less valuable than the dog's designated bedroom. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, insidious, like the slow ache in my back. It just grew, day by day, small slight by small slight, until it was the only thing I could feel. I remembered a time when Kevin called me his rock, when he came to me for advice, for comfort. That felt like a lifetime ago. In this house, in Northwood, Irvine, I wasn't a rock. I was a piece of driftwood, washed up and ignored. The air in the living room felt thick and stale. I pulled the thin throw blanket tighter around my shoulders. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. The dog in the guest room upstairs slept soundly. I was sure. He had his routine, he had his bed, I had the sofa, and the growing realization that I had made a terrible mistake coming here. The following morning, the air felt brittle. Sarah was already up, making coffee. She moved with a hurried efficiency that left no room for casual conversation, no space for the quiet anxieties that had kept me awake. The dog, Buster, padded into the kitchen, his claws clicking softly on the tile floor. Sarah cooed at him, scratched his ears. "Morning, handsome boy," she murmured. He wagged his tail slowly, then ambled over to his food bowl. My presence felt like an afterthought in this morning ritual. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of the bitter coffee from their machine. My back stiffened as I sat. I watched them interact, Sarah with the dog, then Kevin coming downstairs, grabbing a mug, reading his phone over breakfast. They talked about their day, their work, the baby who was still sleeping. They talked around me, not to me. I was part of the furniture, perhaps less animated than the large, overstuffed armchair in the living room. I remembered visiting them a few years ago, before the baby, before the dog was old and arthritic. I had stayed in the guest room then. They had made a point of setting it up nicely. That felt like a different life. Or maybe I was a different person then, less needy, less vulnerable, or maybe they were different people, less entitled. My son, Kevin, had always been good to me, or so I thought. He was busy now, consumed by his new family, his demanding job in tech. I told myself he was just tired, distracted, that this wasn't deliberate, but the small things added up. Dinners where they talked about people I didn't know, inside jokes I wasn't part of, recommendations for TV shows they watched together after I went to the sofa bed, not being asked my opinion on anything regarding the baby, despite having raised two children myself. The baby's pediatrician, the feeding schedule, the daycare research, it was all decided between them. My experience, my knowledge was irrelevant. He just needs his space, Sarah had said about the dog. It echoed in my mind. It wasn't just about physical space. It was about emotional space. My space in their lives had shrunk to accommodate. What? Their convenience? Their new identity as a nuclear family? The dog's routine? I looked out the window at the identical beige houses. There was no nature here, no trees with changing leaves like back home, just planned perfection, sterile and uniform. It felt like a reflection of my situation, outwardly fine, inwardly stifling. I considered calling my friend Carol back in Ashland. She'd understand. She'd lost her husband years ago, too. She knew the quiet loneliness, the way the world moved on without you. But I felt a sense of shame. How could I explain that my own son, my own family treated me this way? That the dog had the guest room? It sounded absurd, petty. But it wasn't petty. It was fundamental. It stripped away dignity piece by piece. The silence stretched, filled only by the clinking of silverware and the soft sounds of Buster chewing his food. I thought about my husband, Arthur. He would have never allowed this. He had a quiet strength, a protective instinct. He would have seen it immediately, the subtle dismissal, the casual disregard. His absence was a constant ache, different from my back pain, but just as debilitating. He had been gone 5 years now, 5 years navigating the world alone. I thought I was managing. I had my routines, my friends, my garden. Then Kevin called, and I thought family. I thought I was needed. Perhaps I was needed, just not wanted, not valued beyond the task I performed. I finished my coffee. The bitterness lingered. I needed to start making lunch for Sarah and the baby. That was today's task. Prepare the pureed carrots, wash the bottles, be useful, be invisible. Don't complain about the sofa. Don't mention the guest room. Definitely don't mention the dog. Just exist in the periphery, perform the duty, and wait for the promised few weeks to end. But a cold certainty was beginning to form. The few weeks might never, or they would end, and I would go back to my empty house, more empty than before. The days blurred into a routine of caretaking that felt less like nurturing and more like service. Mornings were about the baby's breakfast, sterilizing bottles, changing diapers. Afternoons were laundry, tidying the perpetual clutter of baby toys and dog hair, preparing light meals. Evenings were the rush of dinner, getting the baby ready for bed, and then the quiet dismissal as Kevin and Sarah retreated to watch television or work on their laptops, leaving me with the lingering scent of dinner and the prospect of the sofa. The indignity of the sleeping arrangement was a constant physical reminder of my place. Every morning, I folded the thin blankets and flattened the lumpy cushions, trying to erase the evidence of my uncomfortable night. It was a small ritual of erasure. I was becoming very good at being unseen. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when Sarah came in. She was on the phone, talking to a friend about a yoga class. She opened the refrigerator, rummaged for a moment, and pulled out a bottle of expensive wine. Sorry, Mom, she said, holding the bottle up. We're having this tonight. Just wanted to make sure it was chilled. It wasn't offered, just stated. A visual cue of their plans, their life, which didn't include me. I just nodded, my hands in the hot, soapy water. Later that week, Kevin came home with a new plush dog bed. It was large, covered in faux sheepskin. He set it up in the corner of the living room, near the fireplace. For Buster, he announced to Sarah. He needs something softer on his joints. Buster sniffed it, gave it a tentative paw, but ultimately settled back down on the rug. That night, As I tried to find a comfortable position on the sofa, my gaze kept returning to the unused dog bed. It was an absurdity, a quiet cruelty I couldn't ignore. $1,000 dog bed in the living room, an empty queen bed upstairs for the dog, and me on the sofa. It felt like a test. How much would I tolerate? How far would I shrink? I tried to find a reason for it, a logical explanation. Was I difficult? Did I complain too much? Was I not helpful enough? I reviewed my actions, my words. I was quiet. I was diligent. I did everything asked of me and more. I anticipated needs. I stayed out of the way. Perhaps that was the problem. I was too compliant, too invisible. A few times, neighbors stopped by. Brief, polite interactions on the doorstep. Kevin and Sarah's mother helping out with the baby. Sarah would introduce me. Not my mother-in-law or Kevin's mother, but simply Kevin and Sarah's mother. Helping out, a functional description like the washing machine or the one neighbor, a woman named Carol from across the street, lingered for a moment. She had kind eyes. "It's wonderful you can be here," she said softly, looking past Sarah at me. Having family around is so important. Sarah quickly steered the conversation back to local school districts. Carol's brief acknowledgement felt like a lifeline, a tiny crack in the wall of invisibility that had been built around me. It was the first time in months I felt seen, if only for a second, by someone outside the immediate family unit. But the moment passed. I went back inside to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the smell of dog, the waiting sofa. The days weren't just blurring, they were dissolving, each one a repetition of the last, a slow erosion of self. I needed to do something, not just for comfort, but for survival. The quiet despair was deepening, threatening to pull me under. But what could I do? Where could I go? The empty house in Ashland felt like a distant memory, a life that belonged to someone else. I was trapped, not by physical bars, but by expectation, by a manufactured need for my presence that came without respect. I lay there that night, listening to the sounds of the house, the creaks and groans of a structure that held my discomfort. I thought about the dog, warm and settled upstairs. The image, stark and simple, fueled something inside me. Not anger, not something colder, a resolve. I needed to find a way out, not just physically, but emotionally. I needed to reclaim my space, my dignity. And the first step, I knew, was to stop being useful in a way that rendered me valueless. It was a seed of defiance, small and fragile, but it was there. It was the first hopeful sign in months. The routine continued, but something inside me had shifted. The seed of defiance, planted on the uncomfortable sofa, began to sprout. I started small. Instead of immediately tidying up after everyone, I would let the dishes sit for a few minutes while I finished my tea. Instead of jumping up the moment the baby stirred, I waited for Sarah to get him, unless she was clearly busy. These were tiny rebellions, invisible to them, but significant to me. They were moments of reclaiming my time, my energy, from the endless loop of service. The physical discomfort of the sofa was a constant goad. My back pain was a dull roar now, sometimes radiating down my leg. It was hard to stand for long periods, hard to bend. I mentioned it once to Sarah, gently, hoping it might prompt a conversation about the guest room. "Oh, have you tried ibuprofen?" she asked, without looking up from her laptop. "Kevin has some in the bathroom." That was the extent of the concern. No offer of a doctor's visit, no acknowledgement of the cause of the pain. Just a practical, dismissive suggestion. Ibuprofen couldn't fix the sofa or the quiet ache of being unwanted. The dog, Buster, became a focal point for my internal struggle. I didn't resent him. He was just a dog. But his presence in the guest room, his status as a preferred occupant of the comfortable bed, was a relentless symbol of my lower standing. I would see him sometimes, curled up on the rug in the living room, or slowly making his way up the stairs towards his room. His needs were prioritized, articulated, met. My needs were invisible, irrelevant. I started spending more time outside the house, short walks around the neighborhood, just to get away. The beige houses, the manicured lawns, the artificial perfection, it felt oppressive, but at least I was out of their space. I found a small park nearby, just a patch of grass and a few benches. I would sit there, feeling the sun on my face, trying to remember what it felt like to be a parent with agency, with a home, with a life that wasn't defined by the needs of others. I pulled out my phone, a device that felt both foreign and essential in this new reality. I looked up rental prices in Ashland. They seemed astronomical compared to when I left. Could I even afford to go back? My savings were modest, intended for emergencies, not for escaping a situation I should never have been in. I looked up assisted living facilities in Irvine. That felt like giving up entirely. Another step down, another loss of independence. That wasn't the answer. The answer had to be reclaiming what was mine. My home, my life. I scrolled through photos on my phone, pictures of my garden, Arthur laughing, Christmas mornings with Kevin when he is a child, a pang of longing, sharp and painful. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. My son's family, my grandchildren. Someday, maybe, if Noah was the only one, were supposed to be a source of joy of connection in my later years. Instead, they were a source of quiet devastation. One evening, Kevin was home early. He found me in the kitchen, peeling potatoes for dinner. He leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone. "Hey, Mom," he said without looking up. "Listen, Sarah's got a work thing next month. We were thinking maybe you could stay on a bit longer, just until she gets past this busy period." My heart sank. A bit longer. The indefinite extension of my sentence on the sofa. I peeled another potato, watching the skin spiral down into the sink. "I'm not sure, Kevin," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "My back is really bothering me on the couch, and I need to get back to my house eventually." The guard, he finally looked up, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "Oh, Mom, it's just a couch. It's not that bad, is it?" And Buster really needs his routine upstairs. It's important for his anxiety, the dog's anxiety, more important than my physical pain, my need for my own home, my dignity. It wasn't just Sarah, it was him too. He had signed off on my invisibility. He had prioritized the dog over his own mother. The quiet resolve hardened inside me. This conversation, this casual dismissal of my discomfort and my needs, was the final piece. I couldn't stay, not like this. I had to leave, and I had to do it on my own terms. I finished peeling the potatoes, my hands trembling slightly. "I'll think about it, Kevin," I said, because I wasn't ready to show my hand. But I knew with absolute certainty that I would not be staying a bit longer. I would be leaving. Soon. The decision solidified into a quiet determination that felt like a new kind of energy. The despair hadn't vanished, but it was now overlaid with purpose. I began to observe them differently, not with hurt, but with a detached, almost clinical gaze. I noted the small moments, the casual slights, Sarah leaving a passive-aggressive note on the counter about a dish not being washed properly, Kevin forgetting to tell me about a change in the baby's schedule. These weren't just rude, they were data points. Proof. I started keeping a small notebook in my purse. I wrote down dates and times, brief descriptions. March 14th. Sarah said Buster needs the guest room bed. Mentioned back pain. No response. March 20th. Kevin brought home new dog bed. Cost like I am on sofa. April 5th. Not introduced to neighbor by name, only as helping out. April 10th. Asked to stay longer. Mentioned sofa back. Dismissed. Buster's anxiety cited as priority. It felt strange, documenting my own humiliation, like I was building a case against. What? Against them? Against this situation? Maybe just a case for myself, a record that this was real, that I wasn't imagining the quiet cruelty. I also started quietly researching options. I looked up moving companies in Ashland. I checked the price of flights. I researched temporary storage units for the few things I had brought. It all felt secretive, like a spy mission in suburbia. I felt a flicker of guilt, planning my escape while they were still relying on me. But the guilt was quickly extinguished by the memory of the sofa springs, the empty guest room bed, the casual dismissal of my pain. I needed help. I couldn't do this entirely alone. I thought of Carol, the kind neighbor. Could I trust her? It was risky. What if she told Sarah? The thought made my stomach clench. Then I thought of my friend back home. Carol. Not the neighbor Carol, but Carol Henderson, my bridge partner, the one who had helped me navigate Arthur's estate after he passed. She was pragmatic, tough, and discreet. I decided to call her. I waited until Kevin and Sarah were out, running errands with the baby. I went into the backyard, standing near the fence where the neighbor's dog was barking. The air was cool, the sky a pale, washed out blue. I dialed Carol's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. Hearing it made tears prick my eyes. Helen, is everything all right? She asked. You sound different. I took a deep breath. No, Carol, everything is not all right. I told her. Not everything, not the dog on the bed, not you, but I told her about the sofa, the pain, the feeling of being invisible, the request to stay indefinitely. I kept my voice low even, fighting the tremor. Carol listened, quietly, letting me talk. When I finished, there was a pause. Helen, she said finally, her voice firm but gentle, you need to come home. I don't know how, I admitted, the carefully constructed composure cracking. They, they seem to expect me to just stay. And I don't even know if I can afford to go back to get the house ready, everything. We'll figure it out, Carol said, without hesitation. You have friends here, Helen. You have a home. It might be empty right now, but it's yours. These people, Kevin is your son, but you can't stay where you're being treated like a convenience, especially not like that. She didn't ask for details about like that. She just understood the essence of it. Let me look into some things from this end, she said. I have some contacts. Maybe talk to someone about resources for seniors, or even just someone who can advise on the best way to handle this without causing a scene. A scene. That was my biggest fear. Confrontation. I had spent my life avoiding it, but avoiding it had led me here, to the sofa, to invisibility. Okay, I said to my voice, barely a whisper. Okay, Carol. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said. Just start packing your bags quietly and sending me those notes you're writing. Everything is documentation, Helen. Everything. The call ended. My hands were shaking now. Documentation? She knew. The notes weren't just for me, they were for her, for whatever plan she was already formulating. The alliance, secret and unspoken, had been formed. I wasn't alone anymore. The shift had occurred. I was no longer passively enduring. I was actively planning my escape. The quiet rage was no longer internal and consuming. It was externalized into concrete action. I went back inside feeling a fragile sense of hope. The house felt different now. It was no longer just a place of humiliation. It was the ground from which I would launch my recovery. I glanced towards the guest room door, slightly ajar. Buster was likely sleeping on the bed, comfortable and secure. Soon, I would be too. Soon. With Carol's help, the plan began to take shape. Slow and steady, like the tide coming in. She researched options in Ashland, discreetly inquired about senior resources, even spoke to a friend who was a lawyer, just for general advice about navigating difficult family situations and potential financial implications. The lawyer friend confirmed that while I had no right to their guest room, the context of my presence, invited to help, my age, the financial burden of having to leave abruptly, could be relevant in certain circumstances, though she advised against any legal action unless absolutely necessary. Her main advice was practical: gather documentation, secure my own funds, arrange safe passage home, and have a place to go upon arrival. The notes I was keeping became more detailed. I started noting specific instances of their casual entitlement, the way they speak about their expenses while I was buying groceries or gas for my car to run errands for them. The quiet transactions where my money was used to facilitate their lives without acknowledgement. It felt sordid, but necessary. I also started taking back small amounts of control in my daily life. I would tell Sarah I needed to go out for a specific errand, buying toothpaste, picking up a library book I'd found a small local branch, giving myself an hour or two outside the house, just breathing air that wasn't theirs. I started eating my breakfast alone in the kitchen after they had left, instead of sitting silently while they ate theirs. Simple acts of separation. I withdrew a small amount of cash from my own bank account, keeping it hidden in my purse. It felt like I was stealing my own money, freeing it from the potential entanglement of their household. Every time I saw Buster wander into the guest room or heard Sarah talking about his comfort, it was a fresh jab, but it no longer paralyzed me with hurt. It fueled the quiet engine of my plan. The dog became less a symbol of their disregard for me and more a symbol of the absurdity of the situation I was leaving behind. Carol called regularly. We spoke when Kevin and Sarah were out or when I was outside in the small backyard. She had found a small temporary apartment I could rent in Ashland near her, just for a few months while I got my bearings and decided about my own house. It was modest, but it had a proper bed. The thought of a real bed, flat and stable, brought an unexpected wave of emotion. It wasn't just about comfort, it was about regaining a basic human right that had been denied. She also connected me with a kind woman named Ellen, who worked with a local senior services agency in Ashland. Ellen was practical and reassuring. She talked about potential resources for getting settled, maybe some temporary help with my house if I needed it. It felt like a network of support was forming, reaching across the miles to pull me back. The secrecy was draining, though, pretending everything was fine, smiling, going through the motions of grandmotherly help while plotting my escape. Felt like wearing a mask that was starting to chafe. I worried they would notice, that the subtle shift in my demeanor, the new firmness in my posture, would give me away. One evening, Sarah asked me to watch the baby while she went out for dinner with Kevin. It was the first time they had gone out alone since I arrived. "We won't be late," Sarah said, handing me a list of instructions longer than my arm. "Noah is usually pretty good, but sometimes he fusses if he's not in his own crib by exactly 7:30. She hesitated, then added, "Make sure Buster gets his evening biscuit before you put Noah down, okay? It's part of his routine." The dog's routine again. Even when they were leaving for a rare night out, the dog's needs were explicitly stated, alongside the care of their infant son. My needs, my comfort, my existence on the sofa, remained invisible. They left, and the house felt quiet in a new way. Not oppressive, but empty of their immediate presence. I looked at the baby, sleeping peacefully in his crib. He was innocent in all of this. He didn't know about the sofa, or the dog, or the quiet heartbreak. I felt a pang of sadness that this connection, this grandmotherly role, was being soured by the actions of his parents. I gave Buster his biscuit. He took it gently from my hand, his tail giving a soft thump on the rug. He padded off towards the stairs, towards his room. I sat in the quiet living room, the baby monitor crackling softly. I pulled out my notebook. April 25th, Sarah asked me to stay while they went out. Asked specifically about Buster's biscuit routine. No mention of my plans or comfort. I added it to the growing list. Each entry felt like another nail in the coffin of this strained relationship, under justification for my departure. I knew I couldn't stay much longer. The plan was solidifying. The temporary apartment was secured. The flight was tentatively booked for 2 weeks from Saturn. The day felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I looked at the unused dog bed in the corner, then up the stairs towards the guest room. Soon, very soon, their routines and mine would be irrevocably changed. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in quiet endurance and strategic withdrawal. I performed my duties as required, but with a growing sense of detachment. My energy was focused inward, on maintaining my resolve and preparing for my departure. I started packing, not my clothes, but the small personal items I had brought: framed photos, a book, a small ceramic bird Arthur had given me. I packed them into a small duffel bag and hid it in the back of my car. I didn't want to alert them by packing suitcases inside the house. I also started making smaller portions of food for myself, eating separately in the kitchen more often. It was another small step in reclaiming my space and autonomy, reducing my dependence on their meals. Their schedule. Carol sent me details about the temporary apartment, the address, the key pickup instructions, a photo of the small, clean living room. It looked modest, but it had a real sofa and, more importantly, a bedroom with a proper bed. It felt like a palace. I also had a brief, discreet phone call with Ellen from Senior Services. She was warm and encouraging, offering practical advice about settling back in, suggesting local groups for seniors, reminding me I wasn't alone. This network of support, built quietly from miles away, was my lifeline. It contrasted sharply with the emotional isolation I experienced daily in their house. One afternoon, Sarah found me sitting in the living room, not doing anything, just sitting. It was a rare moment of stillness. She paused, a look of mild surprise on her face. "Oh, Mom, are you okay?" she asked. It wasn't genuine concern, more like a question prompted by the anomaly of my inactivity. "Yes, I'm fine," I replied. just resting my back for a moment. She noted, then immediately launched into talking about a problem she was having with a contractor working on their backyard fence. I listened, offered a few non-committal responses, my mind elsewhere. My presence was only truly registered when I was actively doing something for them. Inactivity was suspicious. I felt like a machine that had briefly powered down, requiring inspection. I started spending more time in my car, ostensibly running errands, but sometimes just driving, aimlessly, listening to the radio, feeling the freedom of motion. I would park near a grocery store or a park and just sit, breathing. These moments of solitude were crucial. They reminded me that there was a world outside these beige walls, a life that was still waiting for me. I confirmed my flight details. It was a Saturday morning flight from John Wayne Airport. Carol would meet me at the airport in Portland. The logistics were falling into place. Now came the hardest part, the departure itself. How to tell them, or should I even tell them? The thought of a confrontation, of explaining why I was leaving, the sofa, the dog, the invisibility, was overwhelming. I imagined Sarah's defensive anger, Kevin's bewildered denial. It wouldn't change anything, and it would likely be painful for everyone, especially for me. I decided a note was best. A simple, clear explanation that I was leaving and why, without assigning blame, but stating the facts of my situation. It felt cowardly, but also protective. It would allow me to leave without having to witness their immediate reaction, without being drawn into a futile argument. I drafted the note in my head, refining it over several days. Keep it brief, keep it focused on my needs. Avoid accusation. I would leave it somewhere they would find it after I was gone. The morning of my flight arrived like any other day. I woke up before dawn, my body aching from the sofa, but my mind sharp with adrenaline. I dressed quietly, gathered my hidden duffel bag from the car, and retrieved the small suitcase from the closets. I had packed only essentials. I wrote the note, Kevin and Sarah, I have decided to return home, to Ashland. My back is in too much pain to continue sleeping on the sofa, and I need to be in my own space, my own home. I have arranged transportation and accommodation. I wish you all the best with Noah. I hope you find someone else to help. Helen, I placed the note on the kitchen counter, propped against the coffee machine, where they would see it first thing. I took one last look at the living room, the sofa, the unused dog bed, the baby toys scattered on the floor. A deep, weary sadness washed over me. This wasn't the family connection I had hoped for. This wasn't how a mother and son, a grandmother and her family, should be. The betrayal ran deeper than a sleeping arrangement. It was a betrayal of relationship, of care, of fundamental respect. I slipped out the front door, the cool morning air a shock against my skin. The beige houses were silent, sleeping. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from Northwood, Irvine, towards the airport, towards home, towards reclaiming my life, one painful mile at a time. The house disappeared in my rearview mirror. I felt a weight lift, slowly replaced by a quiet, fragile sense of freedom. The airport was a blur of activity, a stark contrast to the quiet house I had just left. Navigating the terminal felt overwhelming at first, but the practical steps of checking in, going through security, finding my gate, grounded me. Each small action was a confirmation of my agency, my ability to move through the world on my own terms. I boarded the plane, found my seat, and settled in. The seat was narrow, but it was upright, supportive. Not a sofa that sagged in the middle. Looked out the window as the plane taxied and took off. The grid of houses below, the highways, the planned landscape of Southern California shrunk, then disappeared behind the clouds. A silent departure. I wondered when they would find the note, what their reaction would be. Would they be angry? Relieved? Would they even understand? The thought twisted in my stomach, but I pushed it away. It didn't matter anymore. Their reaction was their own. My focus had to be on my own path forward. The flight was uneventful. I read a little, dozed a little. The further north we flew, the more the landscape changed below. Greener, more rugged. It felt like home. Carol was waiting for me just outside security at Portland International Airport. Seeing her familiar face, her kind smile, was like seeing the sun after months of clouds. She hugged me tightly. "Oh, Helen," she murmured. "You're here. You're safe." I couldn't speak for a moment. The lump in my throat too big. I just nodded, clinging her. She helped me with my small suitcase. My car had been parked at her place since I left. We drove from Portland down to Ashland. The drive was beautiful, through the Willamette Valley, then over the Siskiyou Pass. The familiar mountains, the tall trees, the smell of pine, it was like a balm to my soul. We talked. I told her everything this time. The sofa, the dog, the invisibility, the notes. She listened, her hand resting on my arm occasionally. She didn't offer platitudes or try to fix it. She just bore witness. We arrived in Ashland in the late afternoon. Carol took me directly to the temporary apartment. It was small, clean, furnished simply. The bed was made, covered with a plain quilt. I walked over to it, touched the mattress. It was firm, real. I sat down on the edge. It didn't sag. Tears finally came, quiet tears of relief and exhaustion. It's not much, Carol said softly, but it's yours for now. It's perfect, I managed to say. Carol helped me bring in my bags. We made a cup of tea, just the two of us, in a quiet, safe space that belonged to me. Temporarily, she didn't pressure me. She said she'd check in the next day and help me figure out groceries and getting my car back. She let me alone as dusk settled. I unpacked my few things, the photos, the book, the ceramic bird. I placed them on the small dresser. They looked like talismans, proof of a life that existed independently of Kevin and Sarah's household. I ate a simple dinner Carol had packed for me. Then, for the first time in months, I prepared for bed, knowing I would sleep horizontally, on a supportive surface, in a room that was entirely mine. I put on my pajamas, brushed my teeth. I looked in the mirror. I looked tired, but the haunted look around my eyes seemed less pronounced. The quiet determination was still there, beneath the exhaustion. I got into the bed. It felt heavenly, flat, steady, comfortable. I stretched out, feeling my spine align. No springs digging into my back. No lumps, no fear of rolling off the edge. It was just a bed. But it was my bed, in my space. I lay there in the quiet darkness. The silence of the apartment was profound after months in their busy, noise-filled house. I thought of Buster, likely curled up on the queen bed in the guest room back in Irvine. The image no longer filled me with pain, but with a strange sense of distance. That was their reality, their strange priorities. It wasn't mine anymore. I closed my eyes, feeling the support of the mattress, the softness of the pillow. Sleep came quickly, deep, and restorative. I was home. The first few days in the temporary apartment were about recovery. Sleeping, truly sleeping, felt like a revelation. The physical pain in my back began to subside, replaced by a lingering stiffness that reminded me of what I had endured. Carol was true to her word. She helped me retrieve my car, took me grocery shopping, and just generally checked in, providing quiet support without being intrusive. She brought over a few books, shared recipes, talked about the garden she was planning for spring. Simple, ordinary things that felt incredibly precious. I started walking every day, exploring the neighborhood around the apartment. It was an older part of Ashland, with mature trees and houses that had character, unlike the uniform new builds in Northwood. I walked to the park, sat by the creek, felt the crisp Oregon air. Each walk was a small act of reclaiming my physical space, my freedom of movement. I still thought about Kevin and Sarah, about Noah. I wondered if Kevin had called, if he had tried to reach me. I hadn't turned off my phone, but I hadn't checked for missed calls or messages yet. A part of me dreaded the inevitable contact, the potential for confrontation or, worse, a complete lack of response that would confirm their indifference. Ellen from Senior Services called a few days after I arrived. She was just checking in, seeing if I needed anything, if I had any questions. Her voice was warm and professional. She mentioned resources for getting my house ready to move back into when I felt ready. We talked about practical things, getting mail forwarded, setting up utilities. Her focus was entirely on my well-being and practical needs. It felt good to be treated as a competent adult, capable of making my own decisions, rather than a problem to be managed or ignored. The temporary apartment was a sanctuary. I established my own routines. I made my own coffee, ate my meals when I wanted, read in the evenings. I started going through the few things I had brought with me, unpacking them slowly, giving each item a place. The framed photos on the dresser, Arthur's smiling face, a younger Kevin, my garden in full bloom, were no longer painful reminders of what was lost, but anchors to a life that was still waiting for me. I hadn't heard anything from Irvine. Not a call, not a text, not an email. The silence was profound. It confirmed everything I had suspected. My departure hadn't caused a ripple, or if it had, they weren't reaching out. It was another layer of confirmation of my invisibility in their lives. It hurt. A dull ache different from my back, but a hurt nonetheless. This was my son, but the hurt was mixed with a growing sense of acceptance. This was the reality of the relationship now. It was damaged, perhaps irreparably, and I couldn't fix it by sacrificing myself. A week after I arrived, I finally decided to check my phone for messages. There were several missed calls from Kevin, all from the day I left or the day after. There was one text message, also from Kevin. It was short. Mom, got your note. Are you okay? Sarah is upset. Call us when you can. That was it. No apology, no understanding, no acknowledgement of my pain or the circumstances that led to my departure. Just a brief, transactional message, followed by Sarah is upset, her feelings, of course, being paramount, and the demand to call them, not an offer to call me. I read it several times. It was so perfectly inadequate, so blind to the reality of the situation. Sarah is upset. What about me? I had been sleeping on a broken sofa for 3 months while their dog had a bedroom. I had been erased, dismissed, taken for granted. But Sarah was upset. I felt a surge of something cold and clear. Not rage, but a quiet certainty. I didn't owe them a call. I didn't owe them an explanation beyond what was in the note. My priority now was myself, my healing, my home. I deleted the message. I didn't reply. I didn't call. The silence felt powerful. It was my silence, chosen and controlled. It was an answer in itself. The silence from Irvine persisted. Days turned into a week, then two. No more calls, no more messages. It felt strangely peaceful, the absence of contact removing the low-level anxiety of potential interaction. It was confirmation, stark and undeniable, that I was no longer needed, or perhaps that the effort of acknowledging my needs was too much for them. The quiet of the temporary apartment was a balm. I started revisiting parts of Ashland I hadn't seen in a while, the Shakespeare Festival grounds, the small art galleries downtown, the library where I used to spend hours. Each familiar place was a reminder of the life I had here, the life that was still waiting for me. I began making plans to move back into my own house. It needed work. The garden was overgrown. There were small repairs that had been put off, but it was mine. It was my space, filled with my memories, my things. It held the echo of Arthur's presence in a way that felt comforting, not painful. Ellen from Senior Services connected me with a local handyman who specialized in helping seniors with repairs. He was kind and capable, and we started making a list of what needed to be done. It felt good to be planning, to be building something, rather than just enduring. Carol continued to be a steadfast presence. We had coffee, played bridge with her friends, went for walks. Her easy companionship was a reminder of healthy relationships, of mutual respect and care. I told her about Kevin's message, or rather lack of follow-up. She just nodded. Some people, she said gently, can only see their own side of things, especially when they've benefited from the situation. It was a quiet observation, not a judgment, but it resonated deeply. I thought about Buster sometimes. I hoped he was well, that his arthritis wasn't too bad. The dog was just a dog, an unerring player in a human drama. The symbol he represented was what lingered, the stark contrast between his comfortable reality and mine within that house. The notes I had kept in my notebook felt like artifacts from another time, another life. I didn't need them anymore as proof. The reality of my situation, the decision to leave, the reclaiming of my life, that was the proof. I still felt a sadness about Kevin, about the lost potential of a close relationship with my son and his family. Maybe someday things would shift. Maybe he would gain perspective. But I couldn't wait for that. My own well-being had to come first. I had spent too long making myself small, making myself invisible to avoid upsetting the balance, to avoid confrontation. And where had it gotten me? To a broken sofa, to the quiet indignity of being valued less than a pet. Never again. My strength wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet, rooted in self-preservation and a deep-seated need for dignity. It was the strength to walk away from a situation that was harming me, even when that situation involved my own child. The process of getting my house ready was slow but rewarding. Cleaning, sorting, repairing, each task was a step towards reclaiming my space, my independence. I found comfort in the physical work, the tangible progress. I planned the garden for spring, deciding where to plant the roses, the irises, the vegetables, planning for the future, a future I was creating for myself. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old papers, I found letters Kevin had written me from college. They were full of affection, updates on his life, questions about mine. Love, Kevin, they would end. Reading them brought a wave of nostalgia, but also a clear-eyed understanding of how much had changed. The young man who wrote these letters felt like a stranger to the one who had prioritized his dog's routine over his mother's comfort. It wasn't bitterness, just a factual observation of the distance that had grown between us. I didn't dwell on it. I packed the letters away gently. They were part of the past. My life was in the present, and the future I was building. I spent time at my house each day overseeing the repairs, cleaning, getting it ready. The air inside was a little stale, the rooms quiet, but it felt like home. It smelled like home. It was my space. Slowly, deliberately, I was filling it with my presence again, pushing back against the emptiness, the quiet spaces left by loss, and, now, by deliberate separation. I wasn't rushing the process. I was taking my time, savoring the feeling of being in control, of making decisions that were solely for my own benefit. The temporary apartment was a necessary pause, a safe harbor. But my house, my real home, was where I was meant to be. I knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of loneliness, maybe even attempts at reconciliation from Irvine that I would have to navigate. But I faced them with a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. The experience had been painful, humiliating even, but it had also been transformative. It had stripped away illusions and forced me to stand up for myself, quietly but firmly. I was no longer defined by the space they gave me or the space they denied me. I was defining my own space, on my own terms. The move back into my house was gradual. I spent my days there, sorting, cleaning, working with the handyman, and returned to the temporary apartment in the evenings. It was a process of reintegration, slowly weaving myself back into the fabric of my old life. The air in the house began to lose its staleness, replaced by the smell of polish, fresh paint, and the faint scent of my own familiar things. I started unpacking the boxes I had left untouched when I drove down to Irvine. My books lined the shelves, photographs found their places on walls and tabletops. Each item was an anchor, a reminder of who I was before I was just Kevin and Sarah's mother, helping out. The physical labor of moving and cleaning was tiring, but it was a good tiredness, the result of productive effort towards a goal that was solely mine. My back still ached sometimes, but it was a different ache now, less a symbol of humiliation and more just the reality of an 81-year-old body. The memory of the sofa still lingered, a phantom discomfort, but it no longer held power over me. It was a part of the past, a reminder of how far I had come. Carol helped with some of the heavier lifting, bringing over meals, offering company in the quiet evenings at the temporary apartment. Her friendship was a constant source of strength, a gentle confirmation that I was valued, seen, and cared for. She never pressed for details about Kevin and Sarah, just listened when I needed to talk, offered practical advice when I asked. Ellen from Senior Services also called occasionally, checking in, offering support. Her belief in my ability to manage my own life was quietly empowering. One afternoon, while I was cleaning out the garage, I found an old dog leash. It belonged to Buddy the Golden Retriever Arthur and I had years ago before Buster, before Kevin was married. I held it for a moment, remembering Buddy, remembering Arthur throwing a ball for him in the backyard. It brought a smile to my face, a warm memory, not tinged with the bitterness associated with Buster. A dog, in and of itself, was just a creature. The meaning assigned to it, the value placed upon it in relation to a human being, that was the issue. I hung the leash on a hook in the garage. It was just a leash, a memory. It held no power over my present reality. The garden was my next project. Spring was arriving in Ashland, and the dormant plants were showing signs of life. Clearing the weeds, turning the soil, planting the flower beds, It was a restorative process. My hands in the earth felt grounding. It connected me to something real, something that responded to care and attention, unlike the unresponsive emotional landscape I had left behind. I planted flowers that Arthur had loved, vegetables I enjoyed growing. It was a garden for me, for my pleasure, for my sustenance. It was a tangible symbol of nurturing something that was truly mine. I knew I couldn't stay in the temporary apartment indefinitely. The lease was short term, but moving back into my house felt less daunting now. I had support, ruses, and, most importantly, the quiet strength I had found within myself. The house was almost ready. The major repairs were done. The cleaning was finished. It just needed the final touches, the infusion of my presence on a full-time basis. The possibility of contact from Kevin or Sarah still existed, but the fear had dissipated. I was prepared for whatever came. I was on my own ground now, literally and figuratively. I had reclaimed my space, my dignity, my sense of self. It had been a difficult journey, marked by quiet pain and humiliation, but it had led me to a place of quiet strength and independence. I was an old woman, yes, but I was not diminished. I was not invisible. I was here in my home, ready to live the rest of my life on my own terms. The memory of the dog on the bed and me on the floor would always be a part of my story. But it was no longer the defining part. It was the spark that ignited the slow burn towards reclaiming everything they had tried, perhaps unknowingly, to take away. My home was waiting. My garden was waiting. My life was waiting. And I was ready.